So we're in our MB Confession of Faith. As a church, we belong to the Mennonite Brethren denomination. We are a part of that family, and it's wonderful because it's nice to draw on a larger body outside of ourselves, so we don't have to think of everything on ourselves. It's actually, we need support. Just like you as a follower of Christ can't fully do that on your own, you need a community. So as a church, do we need a community that we draw on as well, that provides accountability for us, that provides structure and resources for us as a church. And so we are part of this denomination, which I've really valued, not having to make up everything myself, but being able to look at those who've studied and thought. And so our confession, if you're new here, is 18 statements. First 9 are more theological in their reflection. The second 8 are more the application of that theology. And then the last one is theological again, the final triumph of Christ. And so this confession is often kind of on the back burner and not thought about a lot, but in so many ways it shapes who we are as a church, what we teach as a church, what we hold as a church, and it shapes us, and the leaders of our church, such as myself, are bound to kind of work within this. Not always agreeing on absolutely yet everything, because we don't, but working to submit one to another and also within our larger framework of churches. And so over the last 3 years, we've been journeying through this 6 a year. And so right now we are on article number 14. And I'm just wondering if we have that or if we're having some technical issues. Almost there? So, well, why don't I give a bit of a preamble here? So as we start this, our article, I just want to pause, and I want to recognize that the topics of abortion, assisted suicide, death they're very personal. And there's a lot of different perspectives. And so as we approach these aren't just something that are out there, but all of us in some way or form have had to grapple with questions of life and death. There are no easy answers as we do that. What sounds so simple up here, applied in life, often is more challenging. And so as I preach, I want to just acknowledge that I'm not going to be able to speak to the breadth of this conversation. And there are going to be some spots where you might find tension with what I'm saying, and that's okay. We're a church where we can wrestle that through together, where we can talk about that. Also, I want to acknowledge that Jesus' grace is so great. We are together as a church anchored in the grace of Jesus Christ. And so no matter the decisions that you have faced, you're welcomed and loved here. And God's grace reaches to you as we submit and love one another. Also, I'm not going to be able to address everything because right now technology is so rapidly advancing. Laws are changing so fast that nothing I say will be totally applicable in a week. There's so much rapid change that we together want to build a theological structure, a framework from which we can approach the different challenges that we'll face, the different conversations that we'll have. And with that structure, then we can begin to address the questions and the challenges that we will walk through. I'm really glad that we're a church that likes to think through things. And our upcoming bioethics book study led by Dr. Don Dick and Dr. Douglas Sandherink, that's going to be a great opportunity to really flesh these out, to think through them in a deeper way. The articles up to this point, I've chosen the abridged version. So usually they're 3 sentences long. This is the only one of the 18 where we're going to use the full paragraph form, because I feel that we need that length to give some of the nuance in this conversation that so often is missed. So I'm going to ask my wife, Kimberly, and we're going to read, and she'll read Article 14 for us. Thank you, Kim.
We believe that all human life belongs to God. Each person is created in the image of God and ought to be celebrated and nurtured. Because God is creator, the author and giver of life, we oppose all actions and attitudes which devalue human life. The unborn, disabled, poor, aging, and dying are particularly vulnerable to such injustices. Christ calls the people of all nations to care for the defenseless. Ultimate decisions regarding life and death belong to God. Therefore, we hold that procedures designed to take life, including abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, are an affront to God's sovereignty. We esteem the life-sustaining findings of medical science, but recognize that there are limits to the value of seeking to sustain life indefinitely. In all complex ethical decisions regarding life and death, we seek to offer hope and healing, support and counsel in the context of Christian community.
Thank you so much, Kim. So let's break this down together. That's what I often like to do as we work through these, is just break them down chunk by chunk. The first chunk says that we believe that all human life belongs to God. Each person is created in the image of God and ought to be celebrated and nurtured. Genesis 1:26-27 says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." Kim, can I actually get you to read these texts too? I have a bit of a cold, so I'm not sleeping well right now.
Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
The Imago Dei. This sets Genesis apart from any other religious text. The fact that God actually places who he is upon us, his likeness, his reflection. This sets us apart from creation. God himself, through male and female, reflecting the image of God. Contrary to other accounts of creation, the Bible shows us we are not an accident. We nor are slaves to God, but rather we are reflections of God, bearing the image. Now, at this time, there would be a temple set up, and you'd go there, and there would be an idol, and you would worship it, and it would be a reflection of the gods. But in the creation account, the place they're in, the garden, is actually the temple of God. God dwells there with them. It's not a place they go to. It's the environment. It's the creation in which they live is the temple of God. And instead of an idol, they themselves bear the image of God. This distinction of the Imago Dei is what sets us apart from creation. Our unique place as stewards of the garden, bearing the image of our King, means that we have different rights and different responsibilities than the creatures of the earth. Both of those go together, rights and responsibilities, not just rights. This also reveals to us that humankind was worthy of love and the dignity of God before any task was accomplished. Before any children were had or a prayer was said, the Imago Dei rested on humanity. I want you to get that. Because in a time and place in which people are often said they are worth what they can accomplish, what they can produce, that is the determiner of their value. Here God shows that value is actually innate from birth. That value is innate in the creation of humanity, apart from any ability to perform or do. It lastly reveals to us that God is the giver of life. It is from God that life proceeds, and ultimately it is to him that it returns according to his will. As Job said, the Lord gives and the Lord takes, but blessed be the name of the Lord. This really small, short text is key in developing the theological truths that build a Christian worldview around life. Then our confession goes on to say, because God is creator, the author and giver of life, we oppose all actions and attitudes that devalue human life. The unborn, the disabled, the poor, and the aging and dying are particularly vulnerable to such injustices. Christ calls the people of all the nations to care for the defenseless. It says in the 10 Commandments, you shall not murder. There is this call as people of the way of the King to see the value in every single person's life, regardless of their ability to perform, the amount of money that they have, the amount of power that they hold. And this is contrary to the way of our world, which puts all of those things upon those in our world, says that's how we treat them, based on those. But instead, in the Christian way, we see that the church needs to be a place where we give a voice, give power to those who are powerless. The unborn, the disabled, the aging, and the dying are all of those who have lost or do not yet have a voice of power in our time. And our role as a church is to be an advocate for those who are silent, whose power is not seen. The church, since the early church, embodied this. They lived this out. In the Roman times, abortions were not performed in the womb. They were performed outside of the womb. And what they would do, so they weren't actually technically responsible for murdering a child, is they would instead expose the child to the elements. They would place them out in the hot sun or in the cold night. And that's how the infant would pass away. But the church did something very unique at that time, something that stood out in contrast to the world around them. They would go as a church and they would collect the infants of Rome. These small, defenseless children who had no hope the church would come along and would pick them up and would care for them in the church. They would use their own funds, their own time, and by doing this, the church began to stand out. They offered a different way. They lived the way of love, not just speaking it. And this made them stand out. The church valued the poor. When everyone else would push them away, the church would say, no, actually, these are the wealth of the church, the poor. And so the church has modeled this way, and unfortunately at times has drifted away from this way. But that is our call, to give voice to those who don't have power in our society and time. To be truly pro-life is to be pro for all of human life. We cannot pick and choose which people we prefer, nor negate those who do not fit our political or personal preferences. If we, as a church, choose to stand against abortion, we must be the first people on the scene to care for an infant. We need to create places of human thriving for every person. That is part of the call of the church, is to be for all of human life. Our confession goes on to say, ultimate decisions regarding life and death belong to God. Therefore, we hold that procedures designed to take life, including abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, are an affront to the sovereignty of God. Now, I want to make one caveat really clear here. This does not include medical procedures designed to save the life of a mother. This does not include that. But it's saying here that there is something innate, there's something precious about life that we protect at all ends of the spectrum of life. Psalm 139:13 says this, and Kim, if you could read it.
For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be.
Woven, knit, created. Has anyone got a blanket from somebody else that was woven? Maybe knit, created? Yeah? okay, a few of you, right? You get this blanket, and you know the love that's gone into it. You know the hours. You know the time. This person has sat there putting together this blanket by hand. And the psalmist here is using this. He's saying that God cares about us in the same way. He intentionally creates us with purpose. We're not an accident. Whenever someone says, oh, my kid was an accident, I say, no, there's no accidents. Sometimes it wasn't on purpose by you, but no one's an accident. God intentionally creates with purpose, like a knit blanket taking hours to come together. The psalmist also says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalmist here is delighting in the physical body. He's saying, my body, which you have made, is wonderful. You have intentionally made every part of me. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Every part you have made, and I delight in that. It brings honor to God. We are the artwork of God. People are beautiful for a reason, because God is a God who creates beauty. And we can acknowledge that and celebrate that. But our bodies matter to God. And so often we have this idea of salvation as something simply for our souls. So I am saved so that when I die, I can go up there. But actually, the Gospels teach something much more holistic than that. They reveal to us that God is concerned about our bodies. That's why the bodily resurrection matters to the Apostle Paul so much. Because it's the resurrection of all created things. There's been a slogan that's thrown around the last little while, and the slogan is, my body, my choice. And I can understand this declaration of independence and where it is intended well. But the Apostle Paul would actually say something different to us. In 1 Corinthians 6, he says, for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Our bodies are not our own to do with what we please. Our bodies are not our own to abuse. Our bodies are not our own to use in ways that only bring glory to ourselves and destruction to our world. Our bodies matter to God, and our bodies are not our own, for they have been bought with the precious blood of Christ. And so whether and what we do with them matters, whether it's beauty or horror that we create, whether it's life or death. We have this ability in our bodies, and we're called to honor God with our bodies. In fact, Paul also says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And I think sometimes because of the Gnostic influence, which was basically your soul goes up there and your body just decays and goes away. The body is bad, the soul is good. We've kind of divorced these two realities. And not seeing that taking care of our bodies is actually part of the gospel work. That our bodies matter to God, and what we do with them matters, and they are not our own. In a society that declares its independence at every stage, and declares that we are our own gods, fit to do with what we want with what we have, the words of the Apostle Paul remind us that's actually not true. That there is a greater calling beyond ourselves. The writer of this psalm also says this phrase, and I love this phrase. All the days ordained for me were written in your book. God has sovereignty over our days. We don't understand why people pass away when they do, often heartbreakingly. But we know that God is sovereign. That God doesn't cause death, but he allows it in our broken world and walks with us in that time. My prayer as I've journeyed with people through death and done funeral after funeral, and often my prayer, particularly for those who are sick, who are in the last days of their life, is may not a day be cut short from what God has for them. For we are all appointed to die. Unless Christ returns before that time, every single one of us will die. We live in a society and time that likes to pretend that's not true, that likes to pretend that we don't age. If you just color your hair, if you just get liposuction, if you just act young, then you'll live forever. right? We have this glorification of youth and this rejection of aging. But yet the reality is we will all go through this experience. And the psalmist reminds us to actually mark our days, to reflect on the calling that we have, and to walk with integrity and purpose as the people of God. It then says in our confession, we esteem the life-saving findings of medical science, but recognize there are limits to the value of seeking to sustain life indefinitely. We're in a time in which we can medically extend life far beyond its natural time. Far beyond. And there's this ethical conundrum. We have doctors who I know are sitting right here who have wrestled with this themselves. In our extending of life perpetually, do we actually increase the experience of suffering? In a culture uncomfortable with death, it seems to me there's almost two responses. We either artificially extend or we artificially end. And it's hard for us to find this place where we honor God with our bodies and we walk naturally as much as we can through the processes of life. Death is a consequence of the fall and needs to be accepted as a normal yet heartbreaking part of a broken world being redeemed. And so sometimes we go through things, maybe with a parent, with a spouse, with a child, and we demand that life-saving procedures be done. And there's no clear right or wrong on these, but I think there are some important questions we have to ask. One of them is this about us or about them? In demanding that a life-saving procedure be done for a parent or a child or a spouse, are we doing what's best for them? Or can we not actually process that they will pass? And so we seek to keep them around in a way that actually might create harm for them. That's a hard question to grapple with. And there's no easy answer here. But I've seen it at times where families have ignored DNRs. They've ignored the person who is dying. They've ignored their own wish because they can't process that that person will no longer be with them. And so that person suffers far more than they needed to. And that's hard, really, really hard. Also, I like in our confession, it differentiates between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. And so I just want to work through that a bit. So we do affirm that there is a place for the passive euthanasia. And examples of that would be a lack of eating, the rejection of medical treatment. I do not resuscitate, the removal of life-saving equipment when the hope of recovery is lost. There is place for this because in this act we are allowing the natural path of death to take course. We are allowing the natural path of death to take course. We are not aiding death. We are allowing it to take its natural course. However, because life is God's to give and His to take, we do reject active euthanasia or assisted suicide, which is now known as MAID here. Because in this instance, someone is actively taking their own life apart from the natural course of death. We believe that as life is God's to give, it is His to take, and that every person, regardless of the struggles that they face, has worth and value in every season of life. Every single person. Now, I also want to make it clear, if someone decides to take this route, I don't believe they are apart from God's grace. A few years ago, someone who's not connected to our church called for a pastor to come and see them, so I went and saw them and sat with them, and they were in the last stages of terminal illness, and as we talked together, they brought up the topic of MAID and said, I'm suffering, I'm in pain. every day is harder than the last. And I had to acknowledge that. They were in a challenging place. And over the course of weeks, as I saw them, they declined more and more. And they said, what do you think about this? And I said, I believe that you have value and worth in every stage of life, even when it's hard. And I said, whatever decision you make, I will be here along that journey. So whether you decide to die the natural path of death, or whether you take MAID, I said, I will pray with you, and I believe God's grace extends to you. But I believe that our best is in line with allowing God to give life and to take life. And I was so blessed that this person chose to live out their natural days and passed away. And then it lastly says this. I think this is really, really key to kind of bring this together. In all complex and ethical decisions regarding life and death, we seek to offer hope and healing, support and counsel in the context of Christian community. We are not here to condemn, but to bring hope and point to the best path, the way of Jesus. I love how our confession kind of wraps this up. We should be cautious in our approach, acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and the ultimate grace of God. And so as you engage in these conversations, and maybe you're not right now, but I can promise you that you will. As you engage in these conversations, as you maybe go through this yourself, I want you to know that this church loves you, that we're here for you, and that these conversations are important to have. And to work not from what our world says about life and death, but what Scripture says to us. This morning, we're going to watch a clip from Gretchen Wilson. She's a palliative care chaplain in our church. Works with, speaks with to the dying every single day. And so this is the world that she works in. And unfortunately, she can't be here as she's making a move. But so last week I met with her and we recorded our conversation. And she just shared about some of her perspective as a person who sees death and dying almost every day. So let's watch this now. It's about 12 minutes long.
And I work as a chaplain at the Dr. Gerald Zetter Care Center and in Edmonton here, and then also one day a week down at the Good Shepherd in Wetaskiwin. And those are both care centers that are under the Good Samaritan Society umbrella.
Okay, so really a unique setting and role, kind of working with people in the last stages of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so give us just a bit of an insight into some of those conversations. What are some of the challenges that you navigate with the people who are in that stage of life?
Well, when someone is on an active end-of-life pathway, meaning their death is very imminent, some of them will be put on what we call palliative within long-term care. That is, they're very close to turning end of life. It's not like a 6-month period. It is probably within a few weeks or a week. And then there's a very definitive point at which they turn to what we call end of life, and then it's just that death is imminent. So when it comes with residents, very often before they get to that point, we've had these conversations I've talked about, or when they are realizing that their life is, like their body is starting to shut down, and they're still able to communicate. We have a lot of prayer. I am very fortunate to be filled with a building where lots of people love God and they believe in heaven. They know where they're going. Some of them are afraid. I mean, it's amazing for people who have walked the way of Jesus for decades and decades. There's something about approaching this experience that they have not rehearsed.
No one goes through it twice.
Not rehearsed. It's you just go into it as it is, and suddenly for some there is a lot of fear, and they suddenly start questioning, and but what if it isn't really all true? Like, so in those kind of conversations, we go back and we start kind of rehearsing and retelling, remembering the things that they have embraced and believed and experienced all their life. If they can, I try to get them to share some of their God stories. How has God been your companion? What are those stories of how God has showed up? And so those things are very calming to do. And it kind of helps a person to stop and breathe and just settle down. Then there are families that sometimes they may have a hard time with the idea that mom or dad is actually,
That their time has come.
it's coming.
But sometimes in our underdeveloped theology and practice of the dignity of death, we can sometimes keep people alive or wish for them to stay alive in a way that's actually more about us than about their own good. And maybe, like we were talking about this prior to our conversation here, what would your encouragement be to families as they navigate death, maybe with parents? It's a really challenging part of life that we all face at one point or another.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen families who will want to sustain life as long as they can. We have things in the medical system called goals of care, and so unless someone is a C1 or 2, which is either comfort care or don't do anything heroic, just let things unfold. For some families, that is a very difficult decision to make. We have an annual care conference with every resident and their family members, and the physician who supports their family member will always review the goals of care and explain this is how much support they're going to get with this classification and with that classification. And so that's one place where the conversation comes up, and especially if someone is transitioned, sometimes even quickly, into what is really end-of-life care, but their goals of care still would say send them off to the hospital and do whatever it takes. We are fortunate that we have a whole slate of physicians that support our residents, and that's usually where that first conversation comes in with the family is, here are the facts, here's what's unfolding, this is how this is likely to go now. So many families will, at that point, they will kind of have their reality check, and they'll realize, mom has been struggling with this for so long. Let's let her die just peacefully.
And in the last few years, MAID has really gained prominence. And I know as a pastor, I've walked with people who've been exploring that possibility. How do you, as a person of faith, within an environment where MAID is a common conversation, how do you approach that? And how do you walk with people through that decision making?
It gets to be kind of a weird place to be in, because you have your own beliefs and opinions about MAID, but then on the other side of the coin is this is a person who is loved and cherished by God, as we all are.
And how do you give them space for their own decision?
Yes, and yet every one of us, at some point we make choices and we do things that maybe aren't so lovely. And someone will say, oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. And yet what I find in my conversations with those, especially one from just a year ago, loves God, believes in God's forgiveness, believes that God cherishes her, believes that she is on her way to heaven. From her perspective, she did not come to this decision lightly. But she was suffering from cancer, which is so often the case, and she was in extraordinary pain. A remarkable person who I don't think I ever heard her complain about her pain, but I know that it was excruciating.
So how do you be present? How do you be present with God's grace in the middle of something that you also personally, ethically struggle with. And I think we often...
Well, you pray a lot. I tell you that.
Yeah.
You pray a lot. And
Yeah.
you just, I mean, I have a lot of spiritual practice of which help ground me and which help keep me focused and connected. Like I said, you pray a lot that God's grace, God's love, God's presence goes forward, that I get myself out of the way. So then very quickly my role goes into family care and just giving them a lot of hugs and praying. And this gal, she had picked out another poem and a prayer that she wanted me to share with them as a concluding piece.
Yeah.
So I, gathered them together, kind of in a quiet space, and we had that. So, but that's the part that, of course, no one sees.
Yeah.
Who has made that decision is how it hits the family afterwards. I mean, there's normal grieving because someone very dear to them, the family, has passed. So the family is crying, and but to be there to witness that moment in such a kind of unusual way, where someone is literally visiting with you up until the point, and then they're gone. It's a little bit more of a emotional impact than just, oh, grandma just went to sleep. It's not quite like that.
It's an active choice, that changes the...
Yeah. So it's a complicated experience.
Yeah. Well, what a sacred trust you have to bring grace and dignity in this moment, even though you may have different perspectives, to walk with the grace of Jesus alongside the family. You shared a practice with me several months ago that you do. And you shared that people come in the front door and they leave out the front door.
Right.
Could you share a little bit about that practice? Because that really stuck with me.
Yeah. At all of the Good Samaritan Society care centers, it has been from the very beginning what we call an honor guard ceremony. In many facilities, when someone passes, the body is directed down to shipping and receiving, goes out the back of the building.
No one really
there is a
knows,
lot of effort to hide, the movement of someone who has deceased. At Good Samaritan Society, we welcome people in through the front door. And we get them settled, and we love them to pieces and get them involved and help them to have the best possible season of their life while they're with us. And then when they pass, we have an honor guard ceremony for everyone who leaves the building. The first part is kind of in the unit by the nurses' stations, and several of the residents who have got to know this person, they will gather around, the staff will gather around. I will read some scripture, I'll say a prayer, and then we will go downstairs, and in the lobby, then we have a whole other group of staff that are waiting, and in the lobby area we have kind of part two of the honor guard, and we just bless them and we bless their families and just send them out the front door. We've had several funeral directors say that is about the only funeral that person's going to get.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of them had not seen that before, and they said that's remarkable.
I think in a society that likes to hide death, to ignore death, we walk a different path. And I think what you do there is walking the way of Jesus, showing that everyone is worthy of this, of being acknowledged as a person, and that death isn't something to be hid.
Right.
It's something to be acknowledged. It's something to be walked and journeyed through. That there's dignity in that person.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making the time to come in and to share with us your work and what you do. I think is a blessing to our church. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
That was about 42 minutes and edited down. So much good stuff that she shared. But if you have questions about her work, I know she'd love to talk to you about that. And if you have questions about what I've shared, you're wrestling with some things, I'd love to talk to you as well. I believe that the grace of Jesus is bigger than anything that we can even grasp. And we walk this journey together.